Midnight at the bottom of the world, the sea's black glass, broken by drifting plates of ice that rasp along the hull like sandpaper. On board the little red ship, 154 souls settle into their bunks, lulled by the dull thud of ice brushing steel. No one knows it yet, but three sounds are about to change everything: a shudder, a bang, and the rush of water. The MS Explorer was never a floating palace. She was a pioneer. Built in 1969 to go where big liners could not, she opened Antarctica to ordinary travelers with an appetite for risk, small, nimble, a reinforced bottom, and a brave heart. Decades of polar seasons had carved her legend into ice and wind. Tonight, legend meets physics. Just before midnight, the ship noses into a field of first-year ice, searching for open water beyond. Speed falls to a cautious crawl. Spotlights rake the flows. The captain believes the ridge ahead is thin enough to push through. The bow eases forward. Then the whole ship trembles once, twice, and stops dead, as if a giant hand has seized it. Somewhere along the starboard side, below the waterline, steel meets a hidden edge of ice and loses. A seam opens. Seawater finds it instantly. In cabin 314, a passenger jolts awake. There is a new sound in the night, not ice, not engines, but a steady hiss behind the wall. He reaches for the reading light. Nothing. He lays a palm flat to the panel and feels it. Water, cold as knives, coursing down the bulkhead. By the time the master switch clicks the cabin to life, a foot of water swirls across the floor. Up on the bridge, a call from deck 300 cuts through the routine. Flooding. Crew sprint below with flashlights and boots, expecting a trickle. They find a corridor already ankle deep, pumps straining and losing. Bulkhead doors close, but water is faster. The captain makes the hardest call first. Muster stations. This isn't panic. This is time management. Every minute counts twice in Antarctic night. And then another problem rises from the dark: power. Seawater snakes into the separator room, the machinery that feeds oil to the generators. Lights flicker. Screens die. For a few breathless moments, the little red ship is a blind thing in black water, drifting back toward the ice it tried to outrun. In the engine spaces, a chief engineer curses, improvises, and wins. A manual feed, a workaround. The generators cough, catch, and the ship breathes again, just enough to swing clear, just enough to lower boats, just enough to turn expedition Zodiacs into tugboats. On the open decks, breath becomes smoke in the air. Spray bites like sparks, lines creak, lifeboats sway. People step down into orange shells that slam the swells and feel terrifyingly small. The ship that brought them to the end of the earth is now only a silhouette in sleet and searchlight haze, her red stacks watching like tired eyes. 4 hours. That's the number no one knows yet. 4 hours until another ship's lights rise out of the dark. 4 hours for cold to climb legs and fingers. 4 hours to find out if discipline, skill, and luck can hold a line against Antarctica. The longest night has started. Before there was the MS Explorer, there was a dream. A Swede named Lars-Erik Lindblad had a vision. Ordinary people, not billionaires, could experience the Earth/true wilderness, not from a cruise ship in formal dress, not from a tour bus following a script, from something smaller, something that could thread through ice and land in places no ship had landed before, something that risked something. In 1969, that dream became steel and wood. The Lindblad Explorer was born a Swedish-built ship, barely 250 feet long. She had a reinforced hull for ice, diesel engines that could burn hot when they needed to, and a shallow draft that let her slip into passages where bigger ships would run aground. She was never going to win a beauty contest. Her passengers called her the Little Red Ship because that's exactly what she was: small, functional, painted a bold red that stood out against white ice and grey water. The industry called her crazy. Cruise ships of the 1960s and 70s were palaces designed for Caribbean sun and wealthy retirees. They were long and narrow, built for speed across warm, predictable seas, The Lindblad explorer violated every rule. She was dumpy. Her cabins were tiny. There was no casino. The dining room served family-style meals, where you sat next to strangers. The whole point was not luxury. It was destination, and the destinations were unlike anything cruise lines had attempted before. She pushed through the ice of the Arctic. She navigated the Northwest Passage, the legendary route that had killed Franklin's men in 1845, that no modern passenger ship had successfully transited. She ventured to Antarctic Peninsula, where the only other visitors were research stations and penguins. She carried naturalists, photographers, historians, people who wanted to learn about the places they were visiting, not escape from them. The model was revolutionary, and it worked. For nearly 4 decades, the Little Red Ship racked up an extraordinary record. She made 250 Antarctic seasons without a fatality. She operated in conditions that would have sent modern naval architects to their lawyers. She proved that a small, well-designed ship crewed by people who respected ice could work in polar waters. But ice demands respect, and respect is expensive. The Explorer was always tight on money. Her margins were thin. Fuel costs climbed. Hull maintenance in polar waters was relentless. Ice does not forgive rust or negligence. Ownership changed hands several times. In 2000, she was bought by a Toronto-based adventure operator, Gap Adventures, who renamed her the MS Explorer and advertised a new expedition, In the Spirit of Shackleton, a 30-day Antarctic circuit following the route of the legendary explorer Ernest Shackleton's failed expedition to the South Pole. The ship was now 40 years old. Her engines were tired. Her systems were originals from an era when backup redundancy was not standard practice. The bridge was updated with modern GPS and weather routing, but the mechanical plants below decks had been patched and modified, never rebuilt from scratch. Still, she had never failed. The crew was experienced. The operators knew the route, and in late November 2007, as the Antarctic spring was turning to summer, the Little Red Ship prepared for what should have been another routine voyage. 154 people boarded at Ushuaia, Argentina, the southernmost city on Earth, 81 passengers, 73 crew members. The passengers were typical of the Explorer clientele: retired professionals, naturalists, photographers, doctors, 1 or 2 young adventurers who had saved 4 years. None of them knew that this voyage was going to rewrite Antarctic history. The schedule was tight. Antarctic tourism is constrained by season. Voyages must be completed before the ice pack thickens in December. Tour operators minimize transits through open ocean and maximize time viewing wildlife and glaciers. The Explorer's itinerary called for a fast run down the Drake Passage from South America, landings at the Falkland Islands and South Georgia, then 20 days probing the Antarctic Peninsula and South Orkney Islands. The ship was racing the calendar. As the Little Red Ship pushed south, ice reports came in from the National Ice Center, from other ships, from satellite feeds. Conditions on the peninsula were heavier than average, more ice, older ice, pack ice compressed by wind. But not impassable. The ship had seen worse. On November 22nd, the Explorer was steaming toward a landing site on the Antarctic Peninsula. The sea around her was scattered with floes, individual chunks of ice, some small as cars, some the size of warehouses. The captain decided to thread through them rather than add hours to the route around them. Speed was cut to a crawl. Spotlights swept the water ahead, searching for the deeper blue of open lead. The ice was thicker than anticipated, but still manageable. Then, just before midnight, everything changed. The ship nudged forward into what looked like a narrow gap between floes. But ice in Antarctica is not always what it appears. Beneath the surface, floes are anchored by deep keels, the underwater portion of the ice, sometimes extending hundreds of feet down. A floe that looks passable on the surface can have a hidden edge below, a knife of frozen water that has been sharpened by pressure and current. The Explorer's bow found one of these edges. The impact was not violent, not at first. It was more of a grinding crunch, the sound of something immovable meeting something harder than steel. The ship shuddered. Instruments flickered. Then came the second impact, and the third, a series of shocks as the hull scraped along the jagged underwater edge of the ice floe, each contact tearing another small piece from the reinforced steel at the waterline. When the ship finally cleared the ice, it kept moving. No alarm sounded. No immediate emergency was declared. But somewhere along the starboard side, in the darkness and cold below the waterline, seawater had found its way through the fractured hull plating and was pouring into the belly of the little red ship. The clock had started, midnight in Antarctic waters. The explorer threads through scattered ice at crawling speed, headlights sweeping the dark, passengers sleep below. The crew watches a radar that shows leads and flows as green and blue splotches. The ice looks manageable. It's not. What looks like a passable gap between floes conceals a danger invisible from above, a keel. The underwater portion of the ice, a jagged blade that can extend hundreds of feet down, sharpened by pressure and currents over months of drift. The explorer's bow finds it, 3 impacts in quick succession, grinding, crunch, metal on ice. The ship shudders, instruments flicker, then silence. The ship moves on, no alarms. No emergency declared. But below the waterline, seawater pours through fractured plating into the starboard side. In cabin 314, a passenger wakes to a new sound. A hiss. His hand finds the wall. It's wet, ice cold. Water cascades down the bulkhead. He reaches for his phone. Within minutes the crew discovers what the passengers don't know yet. The ship is dying. Seawater floods into the separator room. The oil feed lines fill with salt water. Generators begin to fail. Lights flicker across the entire ship. For 60 seconds, the MS Explorer is blind in black water, power failing, taking on thousands of gallons a minute. Then the chief engineer does something extraordinary. He rigs a manual feed line, bypassing the flooded separator, forcing raw fuel oil through the system by hand. It works. Generators catch, lights flicker back to life. But it's temporary. The ship has maybe a few hours before the water wins. The captain makes the call that changes everything. Muster stations, abandon ship. 154 people stumble onto wet decks in sleet and darkness. Orange lifeboats swing from davits. The sea is 4 degrees Celsius. The nearest rescue ship is 4 hours away. Thermal survival time without a boat about 15 minutes. The crew loads passengers into open Zodiacs and inflatable rescue boats. No time for elegance, just speed and procedure. Children first, elderly next, then the rest packed into boats designed for short excursions, now bobbing in black water, while snow falls and the ice groans all around. The MS Explorer rises and falls behind them, her red hull illuminated by her own spotlights, listing, taking on water faster than her pumps can move it. She's sinking, and she's doing it in one of the most hostile places on Earth. The clock on rescue, 4 hours. The clock on hypothermia, 15 minutes. The clock on the ship, unknown. Everything depends on what happens next. The boats scatter across Blackwater. Zodiac engines whine. Rain turns to sleet. Passengers huddle in sudden close, breath steaming. Hypothermia doesn't wait. It creeps. First the fingers go numb. Then the mind gets fuzzy. Then you stop caring about living. The crew works with brutal efficiency. Rotate people. Keep them moving. Count heads. Every few minutes someone asks, "How long until rescue?" 4 hours, they're told, maybe less. The MS Explorer is visible behind them, illuminated by her own lights, listing harder now. Seawater has conquered the pump systems. The chief engineer's improvisation bought time, but couldn't hold back physics. The ship's center of gravity is shifting. Water accumulates in the lower decks, all on one side. She's becoming unstable. Then, at 4:45 local time, lights appear on the horizon. The MS Nord-Norge, a Norwegian-flagged expedition ship, had been routing nearby when the distress call went out. She's a modern ship, ice-capable, fast. Her crew swings into action with practiced precision. Rigging systems, deck crews, medical teams on standby. One by one the lifeboats are hoisted aboard. Passengers are wrapped in emergency blankets. Hot drinks are distributed. Children are separated from parents momentarily for triage, then reunited. The oldest ritual of the sea plays out, rescue. But one mystery deepens. Where is the MS Explorer? At 5:40 to local time, a signal comes across the radio. The ship has gone down. In the 2 hours between abandonment and rescue, the little red ship, 40 years old, a pioneer of polar exploration, a vessel that had survived Antarctic storms and ice pressure, and the cumulative stress of thousands of voyages, simply surrendered to gravity and sank. She went down in waters 3,700 feet deep, her stern tilting up at an angle before the whole mass slipped beneath black water and snow. No one died, not one of the 154 people aboard. In open boats in Antarctic waters, with rescue 4 hours away, in cold that kills in 15 minutes, everyone survived. It was a result that defied statistics and probability. The little red ship was gone, but her crew and passengers lived. The investigation began before the ship even finished sinking. Authorities boarded. Wreckage was catalogued. Interviews with crew and passengers filled notebooks. The question was simple. Why did a ship with a reinforced hull, multiple compartments, and 4 decades of safe operations suddenly give up in the middle of an Antarctic night? The answer was almost worse. It wasn't one thing. It was a chain of failures, each one manageable alone, but together they were lethal. First, the initial damage. The keel strike opened a seam along the starboard side near the waterline. Not catastrophic alone. Modern ships with watertight bulkheads could survive this. The Explorer had both. The immediate damage was contained into compartments. But then came the second failure. Water found a path it shouldn't have. The separator room where fuel oil is cleaned before feeding the engines was flooded during the initial impact. Seawater poured in from the main bilge system, which was connected to compartments now taking on water. The crew closed doors and activated pumps. Protocol was being followed, except the water was also flowing upward. Through plumbing, through ventilation ducts, through sanitary and drainage systems that ran up to the upper decks. Water was finding its way into compartments that should have been dry. The ship was being flooded not just from below but from within. Like a sinking man with holes in unexpected places, the water sources multiplied. Then came the third failure. The list became catastrophic. As water accumulated asymmetrically, more on the starboard side, less on port, the ship tilted. The tilt was gradual at first. 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees. But as she tilted, gravity's cruel geometry took over. Loose water inside the ship began to flow toward the lowest point, which was now even lower because of the tilt. The accumulated weight added to the tilt. The ship was feeding its own demise. By the time the chief engineer's improvised fuel system kept the main pumps running, it was already too late. The pumps could move thousands of gallons per hour, but water was entering from multiple sources faster than it could be removed. The crew fought back, trying to balance the ship, trying to control the flooding. They bought time, 2 hours, just enough to get everyone off, just enough to call for rescue, but they couldn't save the ship. At 5:42, the MS Explorer's lights disappeared beneath the ice floes and dark water of the Antarctic. 40 years of history, the route through the Northwest Passage, the seasons of penguin colonies and glaciers, the thousands of people who had stood on her decks. At the end of the world, all of it was gone in minutes, sinking to depths where pressure and cold would keep her secret. She left behind one question that no one could answer with certainty. Why did the ice damage her so badly that night when she'd been struck before and survived? The real answer was darker. The ice was thicker that year. The keel was deeper. The moment of impact aligned with all the conditions for maximum damage. And she was a ship from 1969, with systems from 1969, operating in 2007 in conditions that had grown harsher. Physics waits for no one, not even legends. The official investigation took months. The Liberian Maritime Authority, where the explorer was flagged, launched a formal inquiry. Investigators interviewed crew. They analyzed weather data. They consulted naval architects about the physics of the damage and the flooding sequence. The conclusion was stark: human error. Specifically, the captain's decision to navigate through thick ice in darkness at a speed that left no margin for the unexpected. The bridge crew had options. They could have slowed further. They could have waited for daylight. They could have taken the longer route around the ice field and arrived 6 hours later, safely. Instead, they chose speed. They chose the narrow passage. They chose to trust the spotlights and experience and the ship's reinforced hull. They lost that bet, but the investigation also praised the evacuation. Every person off, no panic, no confusion. The crew's training and discipline saved lives when the ship could not. The chief engineer's quick thinking on the fuel system kept the power running just long enough. In the calculus of disaster, the explorer's crew scored a rare victory: 0 fatalities in a sinking ship in Antarctic waters. But the verdict stung. The company faced fines. The captain faced professional consequences. Questions were asked about expedition crews, operators, and their margins for error. If a ship this old, this small, this operated by people this experienced could fail this catastrophically, what was the risk profile for the entire polar tourism industry? The sinking of the MS Explorer sent shockwaves through expedition cruise operators. Within weeks, IAATO, the International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators, issued new protocols. No more night passage through ice fields for passenger ships, period. All ice navigation restricted to daylight hours with heightened visibility. New requirements for polar ice navigation certificates. New training mandates. New redundancy requirements for critical systems. Ships were retrofitted. Backup generators. Redundant bilge systems. Enhanced watertight integrity. Modern vessels being built for polar operations were designed with lessons learned from the Explorer's final hours. Multiple independent compartments, higher bulkheads, better drainage systems, more robust separation between fuel and water systems. The regulations were expensive, the training was rigorous, but after the Explorer, no one argued. The broader question, though, lingered: was the Explorer simply an old ship that had finally met its match? Or was she a warning about the limits of polar tourism itself? The answer was probably both. The Explorer had been extraordinary, a ship that proved small could be mighty, that ordinary people could explore the Earth's most hostile environments safely. For 40 years her record had been nearly flawless. But she was a ship designed in the 1960s, built with 1960s standards, operated with minimal redundancy. By 2007, the ice pack was changing. Climate warming was making ice conditions less predictable. Routes that had been navigable were becoming thicker with older, harder ice. The margins for error were shrinking, not expanding. A more modern ship with better sensors, redundant systems, more sophisticated ice routing algorithms might have detected the danger and turned back. Might have, but not certainly. Physics is physics. Ice is ice. And Antarctica doesn't grant exceptions. The little red ship had made it through 250 Antarctic seasons. She had carried thousands of people safely to the end of the world. She had opened a frontier to ordinary adventurers. In the end, it took just one misjudgment, one hidden ice keel, one convergence of bad luck and physical limits to prove that even legends are mortal. The MS Explorer now rests in the Bransfield Strait at a depth of 3,700 feet. She's never been raised, never been explored systematically. The cold, the pressure, and the remoteness of the location, that the wreck remains essentially untouched, a time capsule of the moment she sank. Bits of her washed ashore, personal items, debris, enough to create a grim archaeological trail of her final hours. But the ship herself, She's become part of Antarctic lore, her red hole lying on the seafloor in darkness, surrounded by ice that will never melt. The environmental impact was less severe than feared. The ship carried roughly 280,000 liters of fuel oil at 3,700 feet depth in Antarctic waters with their own currents and temperature dynamics. The fuel has either dispersed or settled into sediment layers. Monitoring has shown minimal environmental damage to the region, but the symbolic impact was profound. For the first time in modern history, a passenger cruise ship sank in Antarctic waters. The ship that had pioneered expedition cruising, that had proven it was possible to safely take ordinary tourists to the harshest place on Earth, was now itself a disaster statistic. Every expedition operator in Antarctica had to reckon with that reality. The invulnerability that the explorers' 40-year record had suggested turned out to be illusion. The margins were tighter than anyone wanted to admit. But here's what's important: the dream didn't die with the ship. Expedition cruising to Antarctica has only grown since 2007. More ships, not fewer. Better ships, with redundant systems and advanced sensors, and crews trained specifically for polar conditions. Hundreds of thousands of tourists now make the journey every year safely, responsibly, experiencing landscapes and wildlife that previous generations never imagined they could see. The MS Explorer opened that door. For 40 years, she proved that it was possible. And when she finally went down, it wasn't a verdict on the dream itself, but a reminder that the dream requires respect. Respect for ice, respect for the ocean, respect for the limits of machinery and the unpredictability of nature. The regulations that followed the Explorer's sinking made polar cruising safer, more responsible, more sustainable. Lars Erik Lindblad's vision: ordinary people exploring the bottom of the world, survives. It just does so now with better technology, stricter protocols, and the hard-won knowledge that comes from losing a legend. The little red ship is gone, but everything she proved, and everything she caused, lives on in every expedition vessel that now navigates Antarctic waters under the protocols born from her sinking. That's the real legacy of the MS Explorer. Not a warning that polar tourism should stop, but proof that it must be done with the humility, discipline, and respect that Antarctica demands. Because if you're going to sail at the end of the world, you have to understand that the world doesn't forgive mistakes. The MS Explorer learned that lesson.